First of all, we should ask, are there any West Ham supporters here? Well, just as well, because in that VT, Linvoy scored twice at Upton Park on Boxing Day one year and really spoiled all the EastEnders' Christmases, and he was going to apologise. But as there's no West Ham people...
No, there is one.
Oh, there is one?
Yeah.
Oh, you need to apologise.
We did earlier. It's fine,
did,
yeah.
right.
The last time I came, we apologised. We're all right.
Well, thank you ever so much for coming, Linvoy. Perhaps we could start by talking about your upbringing, please.
Yeah, no problem. So, I wasn't born too far from here, really. You know, it's a bit of a... You have to throw the stone a long way to get there. But I was born in Forest Gate, Stratford, 1973. Lived in East London, so I only moved like to Maryland probably when I was 3. So I stayed in that area till I was 21. Then I moved. But lived with my parents, mum and dad. I had an older brother, but he was 10 years older, and I didn't really see him because he was, you know, that age, so I didn't really see him much. But my parents are from the Caribbean, so adjusting to their cooking, which you have as a baby, and then having, you know, pie and mash or anything like that was a big contrast. But you know, loving home, never really knew any different. I don't think we were wealthy, but I didn't know about wealth at that point. You know, if I needed something, it was there. You know, it wasn't extravagant. So, you know, I never went hungry or anything like that. So it was a sort of rounded upbringing. Church was very much part of our lives, but I didn't want to be in church. You know, I wanted to play football, I wanted to play sport. So it was part of our lives, but it wasn't the main thing for me. And just moving through, really, my parents were very... well, they just wanted to, as every parent does, take care of your child. So my opportunity to go out and play with friends was very limited because I lived in a high-rise block of flats, and my parents felt that being down and around, you know, where they couldn't see me, you know, I could get in trouble. So they were quite restrictive in friendships and stuff. But I chose to, you know, still pursue the things I enjoyed, which was sport. You know, any form of sport. I just really wanted to get out and run. I think it was just pent-up energy from being in a flat, really. But that was it. But you know, I can't complain about my upbringing in a way that says, oh, it was a problem. No, it was just a steady upbringing. I think most of the problems were in my head that I created for my mum and dad, but it wasn't the other way around, definitely.
And you did have a love for football.
Yes.
And at 12, you started playing football. What got you into sport and into football?
Yeah, I suppose my dad, again, he from the Caribbean, cricket was a big sport, or is a big sport out there. And my dad tried to get me into cricket, but he bowled one of the balls at me, and it hit me, and it hurt. And I'm like, nah, I'm not playing cricket no more. I tried everything, but football was the one that really I just felt comfortable with. I could run fast, I could kick the ball hard, fairly accurately. But that didn't mean you were going to be a professional footballer. That just meant you were probably one of the better kids in your school or in your age. And then I started to play for a Sunday team at 12 years old, which is quite old to start playing, you know, 11-a-side football. But I went to play for them, and a couple of years later, I got scouted by Charlton. And at that point, it wasn't. I never really felt that I was going to be a professional footballer. I just knew I was in the right place for that to happen, for me to go on and play. But when you're in that environment, you're not the only good player. You know, there's 16 to 20 good players. And I realised quite quickly that you can have as much ability as you want, but if your attitude's not right and your hunger and desire to try and better yourself isn't right, you know, you'll quickly find yourself off and out of the football club. So it was a wake-up call for me, because I saw football as a fun thing, you know, playing with your mates. But when you get into the professional environment, you still make friends, but those friends are competing for the same contract as you. So it's a different environment.
And then, of course, during your time at Charlton, you met Trish, your wife.
Yes.
And you had your first daughter. But then at 20 years of age, there was this terrible shock, because Charlton let you go.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
You know what? That first, I suppose, when you're in school and the teacher says to you, that's wrong or that's right, or, you feel disappointed, but you can improve on it. But in football, when the manager says you're in the team or out of the team, you feel like it's a personal attack on you. But when the manager says you can leave the club, your whole world falls apart, because you're not guaranteed another club. You don't leave that club and, guaranteed to go somewhere else. Then you're thinking, I've got to move up the country if that happens. But I think the biggest feeling I had, a few emotions, was anger, definite anger, because I thought they'd wronged me and they were going to now leave me and my girlfriend and son in a bad position. And then there was rejection, that feeling of being rejected by the man who makes all the decisions in the club. It's like your father saying, I don't want you no more, sort of feeling. And I think the last one was disappointment, because, now what? Literally, now what? And the lady that spoke about Alpha earlier, when you ask questions about your life, you ask the big questions. But my question at that time, how am I going to survive? How am I going to get through? How am I going to get us through? So it was a worrying time, but part of that, you've got to show bravado. You got a bit of front. Like, I was going back to my friends, and I was thinking of what they're going to say, what they're going to think. I failed, and all that. So there's a lot of thoughts, a lot of what other people are thinking, and then finally it was, what am I going to do? So yeah, it was hard. It was hard for a few weeks.
And then you managed to get another club.
Yes.
You went to Barnet. And in your autobiography, you actually say that you said a prayer before games. Yeah. What sort of faith did you have at that time, and what sort of prayer was it?
It was like, the old touch wood, or find that, it was that sort of prayer. It was, please God, let me play well tomorrow, let us win, and I wasn't sure, I was praying to a God who I thought just judged us harshly, saw sickness and so many different things in and around me that, if there is a God, why is this happening? So it was more of a prayer of hope to somebody who I knew as God, rather than a definite, I'm praying, and whatever the outcome is, I'm going to be happy. So it was definitely a more of a lucky prayer than anything with substance.
And then of course, you've got a really dream move to Reading.
Yeah.
And you and Trish, you moved to Didcot, and everything was great at the club, but things weren't great in your family life, were they?
No, I think that's life. I usually say this, anyway, but life, we all wear different uniforms for work. It can be cash, it can be a kit, it can be, whatever it might be. But underneath that uniform is still a real person who has real feelings and everything like that. So on paper, my life was amazing. On paper, it was amazing. But like you say, things were going on. Trish's health had really deteriorated when we moved there. Part of that was loneliness. Part of that was not trusting our neighbours, because not that they were horrible to us. In fact, they took advantage of us by inviting us to things because I was the footballer and there's the footballer's wife, and using us as a trophy. And when we found that out, we were like, oh, great. So that's where we, pulled back. And even the kids would want to bring friends home, and we'd say, right, did they support Reading? Did they support Oxford? Did they support Swindon? Did they like football? We had to grill the kids. And even then, we had to say to the kids, when you talk about Dad, just if you don't have to mention football, don't, because we know what comes with that. And and you shouldn't really live a life like that. But that's where we were. We were protecting ourselves, but by protecting ourselves, we were lonely. And Trish's health really suffered for that.
And Trish started to suffer with depression, was that right?
Yes, it was depression. Yeah.
And so that was a pressure on you as well, wasn't it?
It was, because you don't know. Back then. So that was, mid-90s, really. Any form of mental health, what was spoken about was secret. Didn't really know the answers, and this was across the board. And medically, we didn't know where to go. You could go to your GP, which was fine, but we knew we needed more. So through those, a lot of things building up caused the pressure to build up. And I used to go to training, and I used to come home thinking, I don't know what I'm going to walk into. I just don't know, because this morning when I left, she was okay, but anything could have happened in those few hours. So it was a pressure, and I didn't share that with my teammates because you don't give anybody show any weakness to anybody. So I was living that on my own with Trish and trying to solve it, as well as trying to play as well. And my injuries and my health suffered a bit that season because I wasn't sleeping properly, wasn't eating properly, and then once you have an injury, it takes a bit of time to come back. And then when you're coming back, you're never quite there, so you force yourself to get there, and you get injured again, And so there was a lot of things going on at that time, and I think at that point I'd fallen out of love of football, starting to fall out of love of football because I just saw different things going on in the game, and I didn't like it. Now, I wasn't a perfect person in any which way, but I felt I was honest enough that when I went on a pitch, or if I told the manager I was going to do something, I'd try and deliver. But I saw lots of players cheating, and I just couldn't understand it. And then I thought, what, if they're doing it, why don't I do it? That was my thought process, because they're getting away with it, why shouldn't I? But it didn't agree with me internally, just didn't agree to cheat or do things that would gain money from the club, but unfairly. So I was in a bit of a mixed place then. 26, 27, I was a bit mixed.
And through all this, suddenly you got this dream move to Portsmouth.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, I'd let my contract run out at Reading, which you don't really do, but because of the way that I felt I'd been treated, I thought to myself, I would just go. So I had no club in the summer, had no club. So I was in the same position I was as a 20-year-old, but now I'm 28 with now 2 children. And, it was different. Again, there was a different pressure this time. You've got probably 5 to 7 years of your football career left. You've got to make as much as you can because the money doesn't last forever, And when Portsmouth came in, I just thought, I better go. I didn't even know where Portsmouth was. I'd played there a couple of times. I'd driven over the bridges to get in and out, but I didn't even know. And so when I went there, it wasn't too far from Reading, about an hour from Reading, and I went on a 2-week trial. So I went there, no guarantee of getting anything. After the first week, the chairman said, I really like you. After the second week, they had a contract on the table, but the contract they offered me was less than what Reading had offered me. So even in that sense, I felt like I was disappointed again. I had a new club, but I was disappointed. It's strange, isn't it? Because people see you on the pitch, he's giving it all for his team, not realising that, you're on far less money than you thought you would be, but you just got to get on with it and just hope things change.
And you moved down to Portsmouth, but for Trish, the depression kept happening.
Yeah.
And that kept remaining. And around that time, you became Christians,
yes.
both of you.
Yeah.
Tell us how that happened.
So with the illness for Trish and us moving, one of the things we said, we hadn't found any friends. We hadn't found any friends in Reading, so we'd lived in Reading for 3 years. All our friends were in London. So one of the things, I just said it out loud. I said, it wouldn't be great if we had friends around here. Wouldn't it be nice? Because it was like a cry from the heart. And Trish decided to get into horses, and I thought, oh man, they're expensive, these horses. But and where she kept the horse, I won't go into the first part of the story, but where she kept the horse in the second spell was a farm, and the guys were Christians there. Not that we knew at the time. It may be a few weeks later that they said they were Christians. So Trish told me they were Christians, and I was like, what? Christians? Stay away, stay away from them. And she said, but they seem like nice people. And I said, they start off like that, and then it'll all change. And I said, look, if they invite us to church, we've got to say no. Be nice, but say no. Anyway, 3 weeks later, we're in church. We're sitting at the back of the church. I'm like, what's going on here? And so we go to church, and very similar feeling to in here, really. That what I remember church being was a cold, stiff place. If you made a noise because there's nobody there, the vicar would be looking at you, sort of thing. This place was vibrant. I felt a joy. I felt, this is going to sound bad, right? So don't take it in a bad way. But I felt like I'd just come out of a nightclub at 2 a.m. and everyone's like happy or drunk. That's why at the church, but they weren't happy or drunk. They were happy, you know. I was like, this is unreal. And I'm thinking, they're putting this on for us. You know, normally they're gloomy, but they're being all smiley and happy for us. And it was a really nice feel. And then in the service itself, I was uncomfortable because I didn't know the songs. You know, we sat at the back. I saw people putting hands up, you know, and I was like, what's going on here? You know, what would we let ourselves into? And then the vicar, well, I thought was a vicar, came up the front, and I'm looking for his like collar, dog collar, nothing. He's just got a shirt on and shorts. I'm like, this is wrong. You know, this can't be right. And then he starts to, you know, read from the Bible and then shares his story. And as he's sharing his story, I'm thinking, he's talking about me. Had it all, lost it, and now, you know, he's got Jesus. And I thought, well, I haven't lost it, but I haven't got a joy anymore. I haven't got anything why I want to play football. Football's a job. You know, I need wages. It wasn't the fun sport that I remember as a 13-year-old. So there was a couple of things that relate to me. And he almost had me at that point. He almost had me until he said Jesus. And I went, why is he mentioning Jesus? You know, it's Sunday morning, I know, but why is he talking about Jesus and God? But he believed. He really believed something. And I just thought, you know what, I'm not going to get sucked in now. I'm going to test them. And, you know, after 6 weeks, all the testing that I'd done with the church and a teammate who was a Christian who had nothing to do with that church, all the testing that I'd done, at one point I thought they're all working together. You know, they're all, you know, the whole thing's about me and they're all working to get me. And after 6 weeks, I thought, no, these guys have got something. And I could, you know, I always say it, but the thing I could see was in their eyes. They had life. It's real in their eyes. I could see it. I could see it in my teammate. I could see it with the guys at church. I could see it with others who weren't part of that church. And I thought, you know what, they've got something and I want it. And I said a little prayer, you know, just asking Jesus to come into my life. And I thought that was it. You know, I recognised that, you know, what he's done. And I closed my eyes, opened my eyes, and, you know, God wasn't there. You know, nothing physically happened to me. And I thought, well, that's it, I'll be a secret Christian. And a week before that, Trish also became a Christian without telling me, because she didn't want to put me under pressure. And so at that point, we're both Christians, but I said I'll be a secret Christian because I don't want anybody to know I'm going to a church. That was what I thought. And then a month later, everybody knew I was going to church.
And of course, then you joined an Alpha.
Yes.
Which I believe they've got here, as they were saying, you know, it starts tomorrow evening. But tell us what Alpha is to you.
Yeah, Alpha, the first point of Alpha. Remember I said it'd be great if we made friends. We made friends, and they're still our friends now, which was, you know, going back to 2002, I think. So friendships, questions that got asked at that Alpha course. Sometimes I'd slide down my chair because I was thinking, how's he going to answer that, you know? But lots of questions that were being asked were questions that I wanted to ask. And one thing I've learned over the years, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Ask, you know, and that's what I realised on this Alpha course. I've done 2. On the Alpha course, we asked a lot of questions, heard a lot of questions, didn't get a lot of answers that suited us from our perspective, but it was answers that were in the Bible that helped shape me moving forward, because I could understand why God was doing something at that point, you know, and things like that. It's little pieces coming together through the questions being asked. And it's a safe space. That's the thing. I think Alpha, anywhere where you can have those discussions, it's safe, you know, not judged. And what I thought I knew about Christianity, I knew nothing really, and it allowed me to have a good foundation to build on and go and find out more.
And also around that time, you had some serious knee problems as a footballer, and you had a healing.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us what that was about. Yeah. You know.
Well, that's why the month, me being a secret Christian, and then telling everybody I'm a Christian a month later, that's why, because of my knee. So I needed an operation, and the physio said, look, this is the problem, and it's like, okay, then we'll go for the operation. And I remember, this is quite early on my faith walk. In fact, it was right at the beginning, because I said to the guys at church, I don't think I'm a Christian. Even though I've prayed that prayer, I don't think I'm a Christian. I don't feel any different. You know, there's lots of things that I can't understand. And they said, it's fine, you know, it takes time. You grow. And I was like, no, I'm not. I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I'll believe I'm a Christian if my knee's healed and I can feel God's power. So they pray for me in the church. They pray for me. They got their head, you know, hands on my head, pushing my head down. I'm like, no. And they said, how's it feel after Brendan? Oh, no, nothing at all. And then 3 days later, I'm with my teammate Darren, and I'm with the club chaplain, Mick Mellows, and we're doing a Bible study. And I don't really understand what's going on, by the way, in this Bible study. I'm like, oh, well, these are big words, you know. And afterwards, Mick just said, Lynn, can we pray for your knee? And I thought, oh, no, the guys at church prayed on Sunday. Go on then, if you want to, you know. So anyway, they sit me in a chair. Mick puts his hands on my knee, and Darren puts his hand on my shoulder. Start praying, and I can feel like pins and needles in my knee. And I'm thinking, hold on a minute. But because I didn't want to embarrass them, I was looking like that. My eyes were slightly closed, and I was looking down and just thinking, they must have an electric buzzer or something on their hands. Then he moved his hands, and this is like a pulsing wave, just kept on going through the knee. And they said, Lynn, do something you couldn't do before. And I said, all right then. So I got my leg, pulled it up, and I got my heel to touch my hip. I thought, I couldn't do that yesterday. In fact, I couldn't do that this morning. I thought, they've hypnotised me, you know. So they prayed for me again, and it's like I felt like a feather just falling on the ground. And then for the next half an hour, I had pure peace. Like, just, it was peace just coursing through me. And it was, I've chased peace in so many areas, so many different things, but at that moment, I definitely met Jesus. My knee was healed, but quietly inside me, I heard like a voice just saying, you said you'd believe you were a Christian if your knee was healed and you felt my power. The guys who I was with didn't even know I had this conversation on Sunday, you know, and that's what, it's like God needed to show me through my teammate and the chaplain that he's everywhere. Because he heard when I said it on Sunday, and 3 days later, with nothing to do with the church, I'm healed. You know, and that for me was the moment where I was like, right, I'm all in. I literally said, I'm in. Like, I'm all in, because nothing else can, you know, God couldn't prove himself anymore. I'm all in. And I just said, I remember on the floor, I just said, Lord, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. I regret that sometimes, you know. I regret that sometimes, because sometimes I'm like, oh man, what am I doing? I can't be here, I can't do that. But it's it's the best decision I made, you know, and as well as my wife and my children as well. They've all, in some way, on that journey as well. So.
And how was Trish at that time?
Yeah, so depression, I think from the moment she prayed, I think 6 years, it gradually, you know, the power of it got less and less for about 6 years, and then now she's been fine, and she can tell if she's starting to sense that it's coming back, and but she, you know, prays through it, and she's been fine.
Now, you mentioned prayer a lot, and when you found your newfound faith, you started to pray regularly. You prayed again before every game.
Yep.
But this time, what did you pray for?
So I'd say I didn't pray for wins this time. I didn't. I promise. Even the West Ham fans, I promise I didn't. I prayed that I didn't realise that I had a gift to play football. I really didn't. But I started to understand God's talents. God gives out talents, and we can look at it any which way. And my talent was to kick the ball and run and head it. You know, not like the best of the best, not the worst of the worst, but, you know, I'd done that. So when we started to pray, it was about glorifying him with the performance, with our language to the referees, language to your teammate, language to your opposition. And there's one thing I've learned probably 2 years ago about competition. If we were playing against each other, it's me getting the best out of you and you getting the best out of me. I never saw that before. I used to see it as you're my enemy and I'm going to take you down, you know. So seeing it from that perspective, from God's point of view, when we went into that prayer room, results didn't matter. They did, but they didn't, you know, but you had more joy in that because when you got the results, you were like, that's great. But when you saw some of the things that were going on, like you'd hear conversations about stewards coming to the Lord. We had lots of church members who volunteered at the football club to do security or whatever, to engage with the fans. So there was all sorts of things going on around the ground that we wasn't aware of until you hear it a bit later. So, yeah, the prayer times were special, and it was more, again, like I say, for His glory.
And at that time, you were under Harry Redknapp at Portsmouth. We've got a lovely VT. Let's just have a look at that, of what Harry has to say about your prayer times.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a player at centre-half, Linvoy, Primus, probably the nicest guy ever to play football, absolute fantastic person. And he decided to set up a prayer room in the boot room. And we play Man United at home. I didn't know anything about this. I went into swap team sheets with Alex Ferguson in the referee's room. Came back in the dressing room. There was only like 2 players sitting there, you know. And I said to Joe Jordan, where's all the players gone? He said, they've gone into, they've turned the boot room into a prayer room, so they go in there to say prayers before the game. I said, well, I'm just looking at Man United's team sheet here, so I think I'd better go and join them.
That's funny, that.
And that was Harry,
funny.
wasn't it?
Yeah. And it's funny, when we asked, I had to go and ask him about, could we pray before games? I was so nervous because he, you know, normally people are knocking on his door, why am I in the team? What's going on with my contract? Gaffer, can we have a prayer room on Saturday morning? You know, so it was a little bit different, but he was all right. He was happy with it, as you know, hear from there. But it's funny, who's done a book? Peter Crouch has done a book. Sol Campbell's done a book. And I'm sure there's one other, not including me, but there's one other. And they all mention the prayer room, all of them.
Amazing.
You know, and you think to yourself, they didn't have to. They didn't have to mention it at all, but they chose to mention it. And I know it was there for their own personal growth and journey, you know, definitely for Sol. For Crouch, it's a little bit different. But, you know, 2 big players, England players, mention the prayer room in their book, you know. And we didn't like go out, you know, shouting from the rooftops about it, because we thought it had to be a little bit private for some of the players, because just that's the way they are. So for them to open up about it afterwards, it just shows I couldn't do that, you know, only God could do that. And whatever it leaves in their lives, because we know there were so many players that passed through that prayer room, I think over 500 who would have been in through that, we know that their lives has been touched by God. There's no doubt about it. What God chooses to do afterwards, it's up to Him, because He's the, you know, Lord of the harvest and everything like that. All we can do is our little bit, and if it means setting up a prayer room, then we'll do that. And now a lot of clubs up and down the country have prayer time before games.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. You've had a wonderful time at Portsmouth. And then, of course, you were getting near the end of your career. You went out on loan to Charlton again. But eventually you had to retire through your health, through your knees, and through other injuries. How did you cope with the transition out of football?
Yeah, it was easier than I expected at first, because I went straight into an ambassadorial role. I think God had been preparing me for a few years for retirement, because when I was fit and I didn't play, I remember the team had an away game and we used to have 2 dogs, and I remember walking the dogs at 3 o'clock, and I remember just my head was down, wasn't thinking too much. I remember looking up and seeing Blossom, you know, and I'd seen Blossom, you'd driven past, but for the first time it was alive. It was like 3D. It's like I put 3D glasses on, and I thought to myself, wow, I've missed this. How many years have I been like that? just head down because of football. So I didn't retire then, but I just knew it was coming. So once I went straight into the ambassadorial role, that was fine for a couple of years. But there's only so many babies' heads you can kiss, you know, and I mean, there's only so many shops you can open and stuff like that. And I remember speaking to you about going out and sharing my story a little bit more. And the balance of that and doing the work at Portsmouth was good. But then Portsmouth time came to an end, and I started to work with Christians in sport. And this is the amazing thing. So when I first became a Christian, the chaplain had been praying for 10 years for one Christian player. Within 4 years, there's 11, okay? But he continued to pray for the industry, and I was praying for the industry too. Didn't know what it would look like. So then, you know, fast forward to 2013, I started to work with Christians in sport, working in the world of football, discipling, supporting, whatever you want to call it, the Christians in the game and the players who are on the fringes who are looking at Christianity. So it's amazing. I didn't want to coach. I knew that when I retired. I knew it. I didn't want to coach, didn't want to manage, but I wanted to be involved in football somehow. And to be able to go back into the world of football in this format, I can walk into any room, any club, and won't be feared. Nobody's going to think, oh, he wants my job, because that's all football is. It's insecurity, fear. It's built on that. So I don't want anyone's job. You know, I'm not an agent. I'm just here to help whoever's, you know, I need to help. And because of that, I have so many conversations with managers, coaches who haven't got people to speak to. I have so many conversations because they see me as a safe space, because I'm not going to judge them or anything like that. And I just think it's an honor that God thinks that I'm good enough or not good enough to go in, speak to these guys, because he's the only one who can get you into those places. It's so hard to get into the football world. It's so hard. And those guys need Jesus more than ever. So, you know, to be able to get back in there, and that's why it's great. Retirement was like, you know, it's been a bit bouncy, you know, there's been a few things that have been challenging, but to do what I'm doing with a purpose that it's kingdom, but I don't have to worry about my reputation or anything like that. It's really good. So yeah, to do that with Christians in sport is good.
Oh,
really
lovely.
good.
Well, thank you for being so honest this morning. Now we're coming to the end of our time, but just one question I'd like to ask you, Linvoy, to finish with. There may be people here this morning who are going through a similar walk to you. You know, they believe in God or the sort of thing, you know, but it doesn't really affect their life, and, you know, all very interesting, but what would you say to people that are listening this morning?
Yeah, I'd say investigate. Don't. If there's any questions, like I said, no question is a stupid question. You know, if there's any questions, I wished I asked the questions earlier in my life, the big questions, and then who am I? That's the biggest one. Who am I? Because like the lady shared earlier, people will judge you for what you wear, how you look, and you start to think, oh, maybe I need to do that, maybe I need to do that. But I would say, come back to this place, you know, find out who God is, find out who his son is, and find out what that actually means, because I didn't know that. I knew about God, I knew about Jesus because of Christmas and Easter, but I didn't know nothing else. But once I started to ask questions and you know, read the evidence, challenge it, get challenged by other people, all of a sudden there's something in you that just knows that how can we, this is a bit mad now, but how can we be on the planet on our own, and the universe is so big, and if we are on this planet, this you know, 7 billion of us, how did that happen? How did that happen? Science has got a lot of answers, but let's forget science for a minute. Let's look at how did that happen? What does the Bible say? And that's what really helped me. What does the Bible say? Because I could have a theology, the theology of Linvoy, you know, I could have that, but what does the Bible actually say? And believe me, some of the answers I get from the Bible, I'm like, oh, close that page. Can I tear that page out, you know? But the reality is, once you start to hear the evidence, see the evidence, and challenge the evidence, it'll only lead you to Jesus. It really will. So I'd say ask the questions and don't be shy and read, because that's where the answers are in the Word.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being so honest, Linvoy.
Thanks, Dave.
Please give a warm hand, Linvoy Primus.
Thank you.